I'm Roberta Glass, and you're listening to my True Crime Report. My guest, Lisa O'Brien, is a native and resident of New Orleans, a graduate of Benjamin Franklin High School. Lisa has worked as a civil litigation paralegal on both the defense and plaintiff side since 1990. Lisa also hosts the Clear and Convincing podcast, which can be heard every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Central on Blog Talk Radio. Lisa also amazed and dazzled this podcaster when she debated the impenetrable Bob Ruff on his Truth and Justice podcast. Lisa can be heard arguing for the overwhelming and obvious guilt of the West Memphis Three on Season 5, Episode 27, Season 5, Episode 28 of that podcast. Welcome, Lisa O'Brien.
Hi, Roberta. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Thank you so much for agreeing to this interview. So we're talking about the Rodney Reed case, which is getting a lot of attention. Why is Rodney Reed on death row, and when is his execution date?
Rodney Reed is on death row in Texas for the capital murder of a young woman by the name of Stacy Stites. She was a 19-year-old high school graduate, originally from Corpus Christi, graduated from Smithville High School. She worked at the Bastrop H-E-B store. She had been there since around October of 1995. She'd also recently started working in their produce department as a supervisor to earn an extra 50 cents per hour to pay for her wedding to a Giddings police officer named Jimmy Fennell. She was paying off her dress, and her mom didn't have a lot of money, so she and Jimmy were paying for their wedding. He's currently scheduled for execution on November 20th, 2019. He's exhausted all of his appeals, federal and state post-conviction, and he has filed additional claims in federal district court, and I believe going to be filing a new writ in state court, and he has a claim at the United States Supreme Court, and at least one of those will likely result in a stay.
So what is the evidence against Rodney Reed?
The primary evidence is DNA from semen and saliva in and on Stacy's body. The fact that the conditions under which Stacy's body was found were consistent with her having been raped. She was found without a shirt on, with only her bra. Her pants were undone and the zipper was broken. Her underwear was bunched around her hips, and she was found in a remote area in Bastrop County, Texas.
What was Reed's prior criminal history?
He had history with drug arrests. He also had been accused of sexual assault in Wichita Falls, Texas, in a rape in 1987. When he found out that there was evidence linking him to the rape, he claimed that he had a secret affair with a woman. She was a 19-year-old classmate at Wichita Falls High School. Then in 1989, while he was still awaiting trial on those charges, he was allowed to return to Bastrop, and a 12-year-old girl was raped in her home. In both of those cases, entry was made through breaking a window. That rape remained unsolved for many years. In 1995, he assaulted the mother of two of his children. They'd ended their relationship, which had been plagued with domestic violence, and he broke into her mother's home, raped her in front of her two children. She initially pressed charges, but declined to continue, so the charges for that were dropped. Then in May of 1995, he was accused of raping a developmentally disabled girlfriend. She did not want to cooperate in an investigation or indictment, so those charges were not pursued. In October of 1995, he met a woman on the train tracks. She was leaving a local bar. They walked along for a little while, sat down and smoked a cigarette, and then he raped her on the train tracks. She thought he would kill him. She had to beg for her life. Then in, of course, April of 1996, he somehow encountered Stacy, pulled her from her truck, raped her, strangled and killed her, put her body in the trunk, drove her to the remote area in Bastrop County, dumped the body, and then dumped the truck at Bastrop High School, which was 6/10 of a mile or 8/10 of a mile from where he was living at the time, along the train tracks.
Wow.
And then in November of 1996, he attempted to abduct and rape another 19-year-old woman. He met her at Long's Market. She was meeting friends and they'd been separated or they'd been delayed. He got her to give him a ride, directed her to a remote area, and attempted to rape her, assaulted her. She was able to get away and contact police, and she is the one who broke Stacy's case, because when she identified Rodney Reed, they ran his DNA and found his DNA matched the DNA from Stacy's case, as well as the 1989 and October 1995 rapes.
Wow. That's quite an extensive... Would it be fair to call him a serial rapist?
Yes, it would be. And I think in the light of the fact that he was 22 in 1989, it would also be fair to call him a pedophile.
And what was his reaction when he was shown a picture of Stacy Stites first?
He denied knowing her.
Uh-huh.
He said he'd never seen her except on TV.
And now his excuse for that, or his reasoning for that, or his explanation for that is what?
That they were involved in a secret affair and he was afraid to tell police. He told Dr. Phil, interestingly enough, I didn't want to be involved in this. And that's his explanation for lying to police and not coming forward when Stacy was initially murdered.
And did he show sadness over his secret girlfriend's death?
That's never been a topic that anyone has ever addressed.
And also, I think what I've also heard is that because of the racial divide, Stacy Stites was white and Rodney Reed is black, that this affair had to be kept secret. So they bring in sort of the racism of the culture in Texas too, correct?
Well, that's their tactic. However, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because Rodney Reed has said in many interviews he always dated white girls. The mother of two of his sons is a white girl. So I don't find that to be very credible, given that his preference has always been white girls and he wasn't framed for murdering any of them.
Did Reed provide an alibi witness at court?
No, they did not provide any alibi testimony during his trial, nor to my knowledge did he provide any alibi statements to police in the investigation when he was eventually identified. Later, during one of his post-conviction claims, his cousin, Chris Aldridge, appeared and gave an affidavit that said that he was with Rodney Reed on the night of April 23rd, early morning of April 23rd. Also in his affidavit, he claimed he was at the courthouse during Rodney Reed's trial. The judge and the defense attorney, who he doesn't identify, and the prosecutor came out of a back room, and the defense attorney told him, "We don't need you, go home." That particular claim has never been corroborated by either Lydia Clay Jackson, Calvin Garvey, or Jimmy Brown, who represented Reed from April until about October of 1997.
Was that different than what he was telling Dr. Phil, that I heard he was hanging out and then he was clocking in at work? I mean, wouldn't there be time cards or...
Correct. That's another thing that's not corroborated. He was not, to my knowledge, at the time of Stacy's murder, he was not gainfully employed. Now, he may have been doing odd jobs somewhere for somebody, but he had worked at a nursing home and had apparently been dismissed because he was making inappropriate comments to females.
Okay.
Either employees or family members or residents. So his work history is spotty. Certainly, Chris Aldridge's statement was never corroborated with a time card for himself and for Rodney Reed. But Stacy was murdered at 3:30 in the morning, and her vehicle was dumped around between 4:30 and 5:15. He would have plenty of time to go clock in at work at 7 o'clock.
Absolutely. Why is Stacy Stites' fiancé, Jimmy Fennell, a poor suspect, and why does the timeline rule him out?
The majority of the reason for him being ruled out, or the biggest reason he was ruled out, it's 35 miles from Giddings to Bastrop. For Jimmy Fennell to have dumped the truck in the Bastrop High School parking lot around between 4:30 and 5:15 a.m. and to have gotten back to Giddings, which is 35 miles away, on foot, and then be present and coming downstairs getting dressed when Carol Stites calls him right around 7 a.m., it just doesn't work logistically.
And there have been other witnesses that have come forward to back up this secret affair. Who are they and when did they come forward?
Members of Rodney Reed's family and friends of his family came forward. 2 came forward during the trial and testified. The jury obviously did not find them credible. Then several people offered affidavits in one of his post-conviction claims, including Chris Aldridge, Mella Marie Aldridge, who is Chris's mother, a bail bondswoman who bonded Reid out of jail whenever he got in trouble, and a few other people. When they were interviewed by the state, a lot of them gave conflicting statements, and some of the statements that they made were not corroborated or were refuted. For example, I believe it was Mella Marie Aldridge said that Stacy was best friends at the store with a girl named Rose, that Stacy worked in the customer service department, Rose lived in the projects in Bastrop, and that everybody knew Rodney Reed and Stacy Stites were having an affair. Well, someone at the store refuted a lot of those statements. He said that first, Stacy had never been trained, nor had she worked in customer service. She did not gravitate toward any one person at the store. She got along with everyone, but she wasn't really friends or social with anyone. And they didn't have anybody named Rose working at the store, let alone a Hispanic woman who lived in the projects in Bastrop. Chris Aldridge said that they used to drive around smoking crack. Stacy had a pre-employment drug screening, which was negative for drugs. A toxicology test at autopsy was also negative for drugs. And prior to trial, the state did a hair test. And during the last 36 months of Stacy's life, she did not use any drugs.
Who is this Alicia Slater?
Alicia Slater worked at the HEB in 1996. She was a teenager, 17 years old, I believe in high school. But apparently around the time of Stacy's murder, she was getting ready to move to California. She claims that during lunch, they were having a conversation in the break room about Stacy's engagement ring. And she asked Stacy if she was excited to get married. And Stacy said, well, no, not really, because I'm sleeping with a black guy named Rodney. I don't really find Stacy would have expressed it in that way, but okay. And, she's afraid of what will happen if her boyfriend finds out or her fiance finds out. Well, Alicia Slater was interviewed twice after Stacy's murder. She did not report this statement by Stacy to police. At the time, the police were looking for whoever belonged to the semen because they believed that Stacy was involved in a relationship outside of her relationship with Fennell, and they believed that that was the motive for Fennell to have killed her. So Alicia Slater has never really explained in any way other than I just did not want to get involved. She's never claimed she was threatened. She's never claimed. She says, oh, and I knew her boyfriend was a police officer. He was a police officer in Giddings.
Interesting.
He worked as a jailer in Bastrop, but he actually, I think, worked with the federal prisoners in Bastrop.
Yeah, I think her story is very interesting because I know we were talking just a little bit before we started recording, but I was saying that, if this information were damaging to Rodney Reed, they would say, how many black guys are there named Rodney in Texas? There has to be so many.
And they would also say she was interviewed twice and never mentioned this. For example, if she said, I've been having an affair with a black guy named Rodney and I'm breaking it off and I'm afraid of what he's going to do to me for it. They would question because she didn't report it in 1996. She waited 19 years to come forward and report it at all. And they would tear her statement apart. And there are problems with her statement. The first and foremost is that Stacy's mother testified at the trial that Stacy did not wear her engagement ring at work.
Wow.
So they could not have been sitting around discussing an engagement ring that Stacy was not wearing. Second, Stacy worked, her shift started at 3:30 in the morning and ended around 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Wow.
So at the time when Stacy would be eligible to go to lunch, if she even went to lunch,
Right.
would have been when Alicia Slater was just coming in to do her job as a cashier.
That's a very good point. Very good
And
point.
again, it's on the record in the habeas, one of the state writs, that Stacy did not gravitate toward any one person.
There's also this element of police conspiracy, and it comes into play a little bit with the beer cans. Can you talk about those beer cans?
There's a huge dispute on the beer cans. The testimony at trial, as far as the beer cans went, established that they were old. They'd been out there for a long time, long before Stacy was dumped there. Prior to trial, Reid's attorneys requested to test the beer cans. They had their own DNA expert, and she came to the Texas Department of Public Safety. She got samples from the beer cans and any other samples, DNA, whatever, that she wanted to test, took it all back to her lab in California. She tested the beer cans with HLA-DQ alpha, which is an early genetic testing. It's not really DNA per se because it doesn't individualize. It merely can exclude or not exclude. She got the same HLA-DQ alpha results as the state, which, because she was testing them, they decided to test them too. Because the HLA-DQ alpha did not include Rodney Reed or excluded him, she went one step further because she did get results that didn't exclude David Hall, who was a partner in Giddings Police with Jimmy Fennell, Ed Salmella, who was an investigator with the Bastrop City Police, who had committed suicide in August of 1996, and Stacy, because one of the DNA contributors on the can was female. She went one step further to perform polymarker testing. Her hope, I'm sure, was that one or two of them would be identified by the polymarker, but the polymarker actually excluded all three.
Okay.
By the time Rodney Reed went to trial, the beer cans had been rendered irrelevant to Stacy Stites' murder by Rodney Reed's own DNA expert, Dr. Elizabeth Johnson.
So you are debunking the idea that there was some police officer's DNA on these beer cans that killed himself.
I am correct because the quote DNA is being misrepresented. HLA-DQ alpha is not individualized DNA. It's a genetic profile that if you and I both have type O positive blood, we might have the same HLA-DQ alpha profile, even though we're not related. We don't know each other. We're in different parts of the country.
Okay.
We saw that in the West Memphis 3 case.
That's what I was thinking of when you were talking, yeah.
HLA-DQ alpha, Steve Branch and Jason Baldwin had the same HLA-DQ alpha profile. Jesse Miss Kelly and Michael Moore had the same HLA-DQ alpha profile.
Okay, so it's very general.
Correct. But when taken with the polymarker testing, actually rendered the beer cans irrelevant. And when you think about it, it really doesn't make any sense for Stacy, who allegedly was killed in the apartment hours before her body was dumped, to have been standing around in a field in Bastrop drinking beer with David Hall and Ed Salmella.
Really good point.
And if you're going to say DNA from police officers and Stacy, you have to think about it. Does that even make any sense? Additionally, and I think most importantly, especially as it refutes Rodney Reed's claims, David Hall and his wife Carla testified at a post-conviction hearing. And they each testified that on April 23rd, David Hall never left the house. So David Hall could not have been at the scene in Bastrop where Stacy's body was dumped to leave his DNA on any beer can. And it was a single beer can. The second beer can had no DNA whatsoever.
I mean, the purpose is really to say that there is some kind of police conspiracy because they're really trying to point the finger at Fennell because he's had legal problems. Fennell, I'm sorry. Is it Fennell?
Fennell, yeah. I believe it's Fennell. That's how I've heard it being pronounced.
What have been his legal problems?
I think he was accused in the early to mid-90s in 2 cases arising from his work as a police officer in Giddings They were both civil cases. He was never formally accused or criminally accused. I don't believe Internal Affairs even found any wrongdoing. Neither of those cases ever went to trial. They were both apparently settled out of court and dismissed. One was in state court, one was in federal court. That was, being accused of police brutality, profiling, those kind of things. For most police officers is actually not an unusual occurrence.
Okay.
Then in 2004, he apparently was being inappropriate with females that he encountered on his patrol in Georgetown, Texas.
Okay.
Because he'd moved to Georgetown by that time. And in 2007, he did rape a woman. He responded to a noise complaint or a domestic violence complaint. And he did rape the woman, no question about it. But that was 11 years after Stacy's murder. He was, after Stacy's murder, a girlfriend accused him of being abusive and racist and things of that nature. But she didn't come forward when Rodney Reed was arrested or when he was tried to report any of this information. She reported it to Giddings PD, apparently, but not Bastrop PD or the prosecutor's office. And that's after Stacy was murdered.
Okay. Right. And did anyone testify that he was violent towards Stacy or abusive towards Stacy in his relationship with her?
No, there has never been any corroboration for any speculation about domestic violence in their relationship. In fact, when Curtis Davis was interviewed by CNN for Death Row Stories, his recollection was that in the relationship, it seemed more like Stacy called the shots and Jimmy followed Stacy's lead.
Okay. And he was sentenced to 10 years in prison? Is that he pled
Correct.
guilty? Okay. But the other thing you hear about all the time in this case is this belt that they won't test. The state will not test this belt found at the crime scene. What
Correct.
is the story with this belt?
First of all, the belt belonged to Stacy. It's the belt that she wore with her uniform pants that she wore to work. It was broken, not cut. I know Kevin Gannon says it was cut, but that's because he's not objective, and he apparently didn't read any trial testimony. It was broken. One half was found outside the truck in the high school parking lot. The second half was found on the road near where Stacy's body was dumped. More likely than not, I would expect that Rodney Reed just knocked one half out on the road and one half out when he got out of the car in the high school parking lot. I don't think it's signs of staging or any conscious thing, but it was broken. They want to test it for touch DNA. They believe that will prove that Rodney Reed didn't kill Stacy Stites because this is a murder weapon. Okay. However, touch DNA is not worth anything forensically at this point because at the time of the trial, the jurors, the attorneys, the court reporter, witnesses all handled the belt without gloves because at that time it had been processed to the limits of forensics in 1996. So more likely than not, you are going to have DNA from other people unrelated to the murder on that belt or on parts of that belt.
So that's why the state is resisting testing that belt.
Part of the reason the state is resisting the testing on that belt. Another huge part of the reason the state is resisting testing on that belt is because under Chapter 64 in Texas, Reed does not qualify. He cannot meet the requirements to get court-ordered testing pursuant to Chapter 64. He bears the burden of proving that the evidence exists in a condition making DNA possible. He can prove that. The evidence has been subjected to a chain of custody sufficient to establish that it's not been substituted, tampered with, replaced, or altered in any material respect. He fails on that because it was handled ungloved. And he wants to do touch DNA. He can prove identity was or is an issue. That the next one, he can't prove that the convicted person establishes by a preponderance of the evidence that the person would not have been convicted if exculpatory results had been attained through DNA testing. Rodney Reed, his conviction is based on semen DNA inside Stacy's body. semen DNA in her panties, saliva DNA on her breast, and all of that DNA was confirmed by his own DNA expert prior to trial. Subsequent DNA testing done in 2014 by agreement between prosecutor and defense outside Chapter 64 found Rodney Reed's DNA on the back brace in Stacy's truck and on the pants that were on Stacy's body when she was found. So all of that DNA is inculpatory as to Rodney Reed, especially in the absence of reliable, credible evidence of a relationship between Rodney Reed and Stacy Stites. And even that doesn't exempt a woman from a violent sexual assault by Rodney Reed, because look at what he did to his girlfriend and the mother of 2 children.
Absolutely. And if he were having some kind of secret affair, to say that semen inside Stacy Stites was there for days without her washing before she went to work is really ridiculous, don't you think?
Correct. Yes. And all the studies, even the studies offered by the defense, yes, 72 hours is about the outside limit, but none of those studies say that it is always found 72 hours after intercourse.
Okay.
They merely say that it's possible for it to be found. And that's another reason that as far as the time of death and the viability or the intact semen goes, that's why he's never succeeded in that aspect. Because while the studies say it could persist longer intact, they don't say that it always does.
So how are Rodney Reed supporters manipulating the narrative of this case?
Basically, they're silencing any dissent or any counter information. I am blocked on Twitter by the Rodney Reed people.
Okay.
I have blocked a couple of their people who, responded with the same BS over and over again. And I just got tired of dealing with it and I blocked those people. But I cannot respond on the Rodney Reed is Innocent Facebook page. I cannot respond to any of the Twitter postings. There is a Rodney Reed Full Truth site, and I had several counterpoints on that page going back a couple of years. And recently, all of those, with the exception of a few that make little to no sense because they're out of context, they've all disappeared. And several posts that believe Rodney guilty or said Rodney was guilty, those were all deleted as well.
It's half of the full truth, it should be called.
Correct. Right. Look at what they did with Dr. Phil. I mean, they didn't accurately represent a lot of the information. They left out a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't say anything about the truck being abandoned 0.6 or 0.8 of a mile from where Rodney Reed was living and 35 miles from where Jimmy Fennell was living.
And he had no car, right? That
Correct.
was a big issue in the relationship. Correct. Is that
she was using his truck.
Right.
Correct.
So
and the keys to Stacy's mother's car were in Stacy's mother's apartment.
So it would be impossible for him to have done this on foot.
He doesn't strike me as somebody who could walk 35 miles, let alone run or walk it fast enough to get back to Giddings and be completely unfazed.
It's absurd.
At 7 o'clock in the morning.
Absurd. I mean, my problem with watching the Dr. Phil thing is that Dr. Phil presents himself as a human lie detector with all my training, and I went to meet, and he always calls him Rodney to really humanize him to the audience. So, the audience and Dr. Phil are on first names with the serial rapist, convicted murderer. And he says, I'm going to look him in the eyes and ask him the tough questions. He didn't ask him very many tough questions. He asked him, basic questions about the case. And if that is his BS meter, Dr. Phil, don't buy any bridges, Dr. Phil, please. I mean, this is it's absolutely absurd. But they brought out something that I used to find really convincing, which is they have a lot of heavy hitter forensic experts on the Rodney Reed is Innocent team. They have Cyril Wecht, Michael Baden, now Gannon, and who's the other one in the smiley face killer? Gilbertson. Thank you. And I'm missing Werner Spitz, too. Why do you think that they're wrong?
Well, first of all, I think that they're being mischaracterized as forensic evidence or providing forensic evidence.
Okay.
What they are providing is their opinions based on their review, a subjective review of autopsy reports, autopsy photographs, scene photographs, and a crime scene video. However, they may claim that they have read the entire trial testimony and things of that nature, but it shows in their opinions that they really didn't. In the autopsy report, Dr. Bayardo does not identify lividity on the anterior frontal aspects of Stacy's body.
Mhm.
He does identify sunburn on her face and her chest and abdomen because her body was laying in direct sunlight from dawn on April 23rd until it was covered sometime after 3 o'clock in the afternoon when her body was discovered. Sunburn is a chemical process in the skin. It doesn't have anything to do with circulation, breathing, beating of the heart, or anything of that nature. They don't mention the posterior dependent lividity, which is consistent with the position her body was found in. They all have different interpretations of the lividity. And some of the interpretations of lividity really don't make sense. There's frontal lividity on the upper abdomen, chest, face, but no consistent lividity on the legs, the lower legs.
Okay.
If she was in a seated position, slumped over, there should also be lividity in the bottoms of her feet. If she was in a chair, if she was kneeling on the fronts of her legs, there are spots, red spots, but it's not consistent with the full leg being kneeling or bottoms of her feet being in a chair. It's their interpretation and it's their opinion as a result of their interpretation. That is not forensic evidence. That's opinion. And their opinions are subject to the same credibility determinations as the original opinions of Dr. Bayardo and the other experts who testified at Reid's trial. Dr. Bodden is the only expert who has ever testified in support of these theories for Rodney Reed, and his testimony was not found to be credible by the trial court or the Court of Criminal Appeals because it is one that a jury could reject. And basically, based on his cross-examination, the state was able to turn Dr. Bodden into a pretty effective defense witness because he pointed out, for example, the pants were consistent with a sexual assault because Dr. Bodden says no sexual assault ever occurred. But then when the prosecutor, well, her pants were found unzipped and the zipper was broken. Well, Dr. Bodden says, we don't know how the zipper was broken. Maybe the zipper was broken when she put the pants on.
Oh, she was going to work with a broken zipper.
Mm-hmm. That's another reason that all those opinions fail when they're placing the time of death before midnight. And they all have different ranges. I believe it's Dr. Spitz actually has like 22 to 24 hours before her body was found. Well, that's at a time when she was with her mother alive and well. And we know she was with her mother alive and well.
That is a problem.
If she was killed at 10:30 or 11 o'clock, she would not have been wearing her HEB uniform pants. She would not have been wearing her knee brace. She would have been wearing her shorts and T-shirt that she slept in.
And there's always like a little bit of showmanship, like, these small town experts don't know what they're talking about. How could they miss this, that, and the other? Oh, it's so obvious, but they're going from pictures and,
Exactly. They are, at least as far as Bodden, Spitz, and Wecht, they are all resting on their laurels.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Cyril Wecht got into trouble many years ago because he was apparently using county resources in Allegheny County to run his private consulting practice. And that is why he's no longer the medical examiner for Allegheny County. Dr. Bodden was fired by Mayor Ed Koch because apparently he was not handling sexual assault cases and other cases with the professionalism that Mayor Koch expected of his New York City medical examiner.
That's interesting. Do you know any more details about that? What exactly?
Well, it ended up being, he was fired. I think he went on to New York State Police at that time, but he was fired by Mayor Koch, and apparently some public statements were made, and he was able to file a defamation suit and get $100,000 in damages. But still, he got fired by Mayor Koch. And this is kind of an example. I'm admitting that maybe the allegations were not 100% true.
Right.
Because New York City paid him $100,000. But, there were some pretty serious allegations against him in 1977 or 1978. I mean, you can find New York Times archive articles about it.
That would be interesting too. I'd be interested in looking into that. So they have been wrong. These experts.
They can be wrong. They can be wrong. And I've always found, working in the civil arena, that your expert's opinion is only as good as the information you give them. And that means it's actually more important to give them the negative information than it is to give them just the positive information. If they get the negative information up front, they can counter it, they can deal with it, they can even refute it. But if they're in a trial or a deposition or a hearing and they're confronted with something they did not know about, then they can only give a lame answer like, I don't know how the zipper got broken. It could have been broken when she put on the pants.
That's absurd. So when death penalty activists obscure the truth in these death penalty cases and lie directly or indirectly, do you believe that they feel that by any means necessary or the ends justify the means? I mean, do you really think that all these death penalty activists really believe that Rodney Reed is innocent, or that they just feel like this is what they have to do to get, if they get this guy out, then maybe they can end the death penalty in Texas,
I think that they believe that he's really innocent because they only want to know what supports that belief in their innocence. They're doing, though, a great disservice to themselves, to the public, to the court system, and especially Dr. Phil and the Innocence Project and Bryce Benjett, because they are misrepresenting the evidence. They are misrepresenting testimony. And you cannot get a conviction reversed or vacated and a new trial in court. You're not going to be allowed to only present your side. And if Dr. Phil had been a court of law, the state could have brought in numerous witnesses to refute everything Dr. Phil's show said and everything Bryce Benjett and the other people on the show said. And then the judge would determine whose side is more credible.
I feel like intellectually the public knows that. They know that they should look at both sides. But when they're presented with a one-sided, biased presentation, like Dr. Phil's, they're very quick to believe it, buy it, advocate for Rodney Reed. Even a woman advocating for a serial rapist, convicted killer. What is the disconnect there? Do you think it's that people don't understand our legal system?
Yeah, I believe that is a huge part of it. They don't understand the system because when he gets a hearing, they expect only his side to be presented. During the hearings in October of 2017, I mean, they were outraged at the cross-examination of Dr. Bodden. They were outraged at the rebuttal witnesses that the state brought in. And, they expect only their side to be heard and that the court to make a determination based on their side only. And that is never going to be the way it's going to happen. And, I saw this with the West Memphis 3 case. Mm-hmm. It's just, that's not going to be how it's going to happen. If you're going to win in court, it's more important for you to deal with the warts of the case than to just pretend that they don't exist. And I think we saw in Swearingen, the Fifth Circuit actually called James Riding and Bryce Benjett out because they misrepresented the state crime lab letters to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal as being a complete retraction.
Oh, interesting.
Of testimony. And I've never seen the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals include an appendix with one of their opinions that has the exact letters that they were provided as evidence by the petitioner.
Well, Lisa, I thank you so much. You really know this case like no other, and I really appreciate you talking with me about it. And I encourage everyone to check out Lisa's show, Clear and Convincing, 8 o'clock Blog Talk Radio on Wednesdays, Central Time.
Tuesdays.
Tuesdays now. I'm sorry.
Tuesdays.
I'm sorry. Then I'll have to...
It's generally always Tuesday.
I'm sorry. I said
but
Wednesday.
We occasionally...
You can catch the replay Wednesday.
Program changes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.